Hi, I am Dr. Samir bin Osman, and this video we're going to talk about the principles of geography, which is the study of lands, features, and the inhabitants of those lands, and the phenomena that influences those inhabitants of the Earth and other planets, even though other planets, we only focus on the features of the lands. But we're going to focus on this series only on planet Earth. So Earth has different geographical features that have common characteristics, and each of these features will influence how man adapted to living within them, as well as how they impacted them. So let's talk about the geological or geographical features of the Earth. So Earth is covered at 70% with oceans, and then about 30% of the land has either coastal regions or interior regions. And then when we further break those down, we have about a third of the land which is covered by mountains and forests, another third that's covered in deserts, about a quarter that's covered in grasslands or prairies, and then the rest is coastal areas. And we're going to talk about each one of those a little bit more in detail. So let's talk about seas and oceans at first. So about 3.8 billion years ago, the Earth cooled down enough for water vapor to be able to precipitate into rains. And those rains lasted for 600 million years. They're basically the longest rains in the history of Earth. And they lasted until the Earth was completely covered in water, which eventually formed the oceans. So oceans cover now 70% of the planet, and they also harbor a lot of fauna and flora, and especially microalgae. And why microalgae is important is because it produces about 70% of the oxygen in the atmosphere that we breathe. And so as you can see here, this is a depiction of water if it were put as a marble against the Earth. It was just completely extracted, and you can see how much salt water there is in our planet and how much sweet water there is in this planet. So although it covers, it's not much, basically. And then on the right hand side you see a satellite image of formation of microalgae, and you can see how big those can be. This is like 50 kilometers or about like 30 miles in diameter. So next we have coastal regions, and these are land masses that come in contact with oceans. So about 3.2 billion years ago, plate tectonics separated the land mass into continents and then drifted them apart progressively from each other, which created extensive coastlines. So these receive a constant influx of oceanic air throughout the year, and since oceans don't change much in temperature because of the high thermal mass properties of water, and so because they don't change much in temperature, the air above them also doesn't change much in temperature. And therefore, coastal regions tend to have milder climates. By opposition, inland regions have more temperature extremes, and these extremes increase the more we get away from the coasts. And therefore, inland have more continental weather, which is cold in winters and hot in summers. Now let's focus a little bit more on features in inland regions. So we have mountains and forests. So tectonics also formed chains of mountains that act as barriers to clouds. And so they trap those clouds, which turn release their water in the form of precipitation, rain or snow. Water not only causes the vegetation to grow, but also when it runs through the rocks, it's gonna erode them and kind of form features like rivers and lakes that's going to accumulate the water and maybe basically make them even more fertile. Therefore, regions around waterways have extensive vegetations and forests and wildlife. And because of the high exposition of tropical latitudes to sunlight, air evaporation from the oceans is significant, and it forms clouds. As it forms those clouds, they bring heavy rains into the tropics, causing them to develop what we call rainforests, as you can see below. These have extreme biodiversity in plants and animals. So mountains and forests cover about a third of the Earth's land. Now let's talk about deserts. So as one side of the mountain chains gets high precipitation, while the other side gets much less precipitation, which causes the formation of deserts. Deserts cover another third of the Earth's land, and desertic conditions are also caused by what we call semi-permanent high air pressures, which are typically dry. This can happen in subtropical regions like the Sahara Desert, or like regions like Antarctica. Because dry air heats fast and cools down fast, because it doesn't have the air that has the water vapor that has the capability to kind of temper down the temperatures. So the deserts tend to have more extreme temperatures, and these result in scarce and arid fauna and flora. However, wind erosion of hot deserts also generates sand, and that sand gets carried away by the winds to oceans and other rainforests over thousands of miles, providing thereby minerals that are essentially fertilizers that can sustain ocean algae and rainforest, and therefore we saw that the algae produces about 70% of the oxygen in the atmosphere. So the deserts also, albeit they look like places where there is no life, well, they're big fertilizers of life. And you can see here in this satellite image in the bottom, the sand that's carried by the wind for like thousands of miles into the oceans. Now we have also the grasslands or the prairies. So where there's not enough rainfall to support the growth of forest, but there is a little bit more than to form deserts, well, that's where we have grasslands or prairies. So they're also called steppes or savannas or pampas, depending on the region. So those grasslands or prairies are therefore located between the forests and the deserts, and they cover about a quarter of the Earth's land. And they're typically flat and they're full of grass, hence their name, grasslands, and full of herbivorous grazing animals that's going to eat that grass, and as such, they provide vast areas that can be farmed and can be used to establish living spaces, such as cities. And many cities in the Midwest of the United States are basically on grasslands. So now that we saw the different features of the Earth, how does man interact with these geographical features? So those geographical features, they determine the conditions for people to settle, as well as to develop cultures that were going to reflect their environment, as well as the goods and services they produce and trade, and the impact that their production and activity has on the Earth. So let's take each one of those and talk a little bit more about it. So let's start with the settlement. So the global population of Earth is around 7 billion people. And most of these people live within temperate climates, about 50% of them. Also, 50% of them live near coasts. Obviously, these add to more than 100% because many of the temperate climates are also coasts. Most people also live close to fresh water, either from rivers or within lakes and similar structures, similar formations, and where there is fertile soil, i.e. river valleys, volcanic soils, etc. So these conditions have combined in many places on the globe, as you can see here in red, but they're focused, or they're particularly concentrated in 3 large areas, which are the southeast of Asia, where about 50% of Earth's population lies, South Asia, where about 1/5 of people live, and Europe, where about 15% of the population lives. So let's take the reasons why. So in South and East Asia, the monsoon that you see here in the region brings heavy rainfall, which is contained in the east by the vast elevated Tibetan plateau. So that's going to stop all this rainfall and make it, precipitate in the west. And that's going to cause a lot of fertile land, which caused a lot of people to settle for a long time, for thousands of years, and that caused a high concentration there. Now in South Asia, we have also the heavy monsoon rain that comes, and this time it's trapped by the Himalayan mountain range and basically makes it fall below the Himalayan range on all the sub-Indian continent, and that's what made it populous from a long time ago and fertile. Then in Europe, we have 2 things happening. We have first the abundant rain that comes from the western oceanic winds thus trapped by numerous mountain ranges in Europe, ranging from the Pyrenees and the Alps in the west all the way to the Ural Mountains in the east. And this is also combined with another effect, which is called the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream is a mild or like warm water stream that comes from the Gulf of Mexico, hence its name Gulf Stream, and that travels all the way to Western Europe, and it makes its climate much milder. As you can see, Europe is at the same latitude as Canada, and by far Canada is much, much colder than Europe. And that's because the Gulf Stream makes it much milder. And these conditions made life easy to settle in Europe, and that's how it caused a lot of concentration in Europe. Now, in addition to these three concentrations, there are other concentrations where there were favorable conditions, such as the Middle East and Egypt, as you can see, and Central America, which along with the aforementioned regions harbored what we call the cradles of civilization. So let's talk about civilization then. So in conditions where the favorable environment is not constant either in space or time or just comes and goes, people adopted nomadic lifestyles to basically follow their food sources, which are the herbivorous animals, as they graze and search for edible plants. So this is the case for people who live in the deserts and the arid steppes. Conversely, where conditions are stably favorable, like throughout the year, people have established fixed settlements that developed into cities and then concentrated more and more products and services, which enabled specialization of labors, which freed more time for people to specialize in architecture or engineering, medicine, arts, etc., and then formed these civilizations which have distinct identities that reflect their environment. And as the concentration continues, about 50% of people actually currently live in cities, and this number is projected to go as high as 70% by 2050. Now, in terms of activity, people exploit the available resources that they have in the geographies where they exist to produce the goods for their own consumption, as well as to exchange with other groups of people. So as such, nomadic people produced mainly animal products such as meats, skins, and furs, etc., that they traded between them or with settled people who mainly produced agricultural products. As people discovered new technologies, they started extracting natural raw materials to produce new types of goods. Smelting, for example, and we're going to talk about this in the section about history. Smelting, melting of metals, enabled the production and trade of bronze and then iron tools, and then jewelry. And food preparation and preservation techniques developed spice and salt trades, which in turn developed more cities along the trade routes like the Silk Road and the Spice Route in Asia and the Middle East. With the Industrial Revolution came the need for more energy, such as coal, oil, that make electricity, etc. And the need for new raw materials for the Industrial Revolution, such as phosphates for fertilizers or lithiums for batteries, etc. And so these needs reshaped trade routes and continue to do so as new technologies emerge and subsequent needs emerge. And so services also develop tremendously in the information age, and we're in the beginning of the information age actually, so it will continue to develop not only the urbanization of people as well as the globalization of where they live and how they produce. And so all of this activity must have an impact on Earth. So what impact does human activity have on the geography of Earth? So it's important to note that the production of goods and services throughout the history of mankind never had any significant impact on the ecosystem until it reached the industrial scale during the Industrial Revolution of the 20th century. And it can be categorized into three main categories, which are impact on the forest, impact of toxic byproducts, as well as impact on the climate. So let's talk about each one. So about the forest, so whereby there is the need for agricultural land, which is growing, and currently 10% of total land is actually agricultural land. Well, they have to take it somewhere, and it's increasingly at the point where now it's taken from rainforests. which are, like we said, essential for Earth's ecosystem. The other effect is toxic byproducts that are released mostly from chemical manufacturing, as well as from oil refinement and metal fabrication. They tend to accumulate in soil. They also accumulate in fresh water. They accumulate also in oceans, and they will poison them for as long as they are present there, which actually for some chemicals can be a long time. And plastics, for example, they can stay for hundreds of years in water in many places. The third impact on the geography of the planet is the climate changing byproducts, mostly CO2 and other greenhouse gases that are released mostly from burning fossil fuels, and to a lesser degree methane, which is CH4, which is leaking or like released from as a byproduct of the intensive agriculture. And these are greenhouse gases, and as we explained in the climatology video, they basically trap the solar radiation. And so they're supposed to be regulated, fine-tuned, in Earth to just trap enough heat to make it warm, but not to make it overly warm. And so now we have the accumulation of these greenhouses, which are heating the atmosphere, and their excess is causing the glaciers to melt, which is leading to rising sea levels and then threatening coastal cities, as you can see in this image below, where, like I said, 50% of people live. So it can have a devastating impact on a lot of people. It's also destabilizing temperature-sensitive ecosystems and causing more extreme weather events, like you see in the right-hand side also by droughts, and the extinction of a lot of species. So contrary to methane, which only lasts for about 12 years in the atmosphere before it gets disintegrated, while CO2 remains for centuries in the atmosphere, and so it tends to accumulate a lot. And so therefore, it's now accumulating at an alarming rate. And so people need to research and invest in new clean technologies in order to produce the energy they need and produce the industrial products they need and the agriculture they need in a sustainable way to preserve Earth for future generations. And with that, we came to the conclusion of our section on the principles of geography. I welcome your comments. I'll see you in the next video, and thank you for viewing.